The day before my son's wedding, his fiancée whispered in my ear, "Starting tomorrow, you're no longer part of this family. You're no longer welcome." Something inside me shattered. I decided to stay home devastated. What I didn't know was that hours later their wedding would completely fall apart for a reason no one saw coming. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories travel. Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family. That's exactly what my son's fiancée whispered to me on the eve of their wedding, while the other guests chatted happily in the background. Her smile never wavered for a second, but her eyes were ice cold. I stood there frozen, the gift I had brought. A memory album I spent months putting together hung from my trembling hands like a dead weight. In that moment, something inside me broke. After 2 decades of raising my son Ethan alone, making every sacrifice imaginable, this woman was telling me as calmly as could be that I no longer had a place in his life. My name is Helen, and for 25 years I was both mother and father to Ethan. When my husband left us, Ethan was just 5 years old, still clutching that stuffed dinosaur he wouldn't even let go of to sleep. I remember that first night alone, when he asked me with those huge eyes, "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" And I, swallowing my tears, just smiled and said that sometimes people need to follow different paths. From then on, it was years of waking up at 5 in the morning to get him ready for school, before rushing to my first shift at the clinic where I worked as a receptionist. Then I'd go to my second job at a department store until late at night. Many times I came home so exhausted I could barely take off my shoes before falling asleep. But I always saved enough energy to listen to his day, to help him with his homework, to be his personal cheerleader at his school soccer games. I saved every possible penny. I gave up new clothes, I cut my own hair, I sold the car to pay for his college tuition when scholarships weren't enough. When Ethan graduated from law school, I felt like I had fulfilled the silent promise I made to that scared little boy. He would have every possible opportunity, no matter what I had to sacrifice. So when he introduced me to Jessica 3 years ago, I really tried to like her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and well-spoken, everything I never was. She worked at a well-known advertising agency and was always impeccably dressed. Ethan seemed smitten. His eyes lit up whenever she walked into a room, and I just wanted to see him happy. But there was something about Jessica that unsettled me from the start. The way her smile would vanish the moment Ethan turned his back. How she spoke to me with that condescending tone, as if she were doing me a huge favor just by addressing me. At family gatherings, she monopolized the conversation, talking about international trips and famous clients, rarely showing any interest in my life or in stories about Ethan's childhood. "Oh, how cute," she'd say whenever I mentioned something from the past, as if she were talking to a child. For Ethan's 30th birthday, I baked the chocolate raspberry cake I had made for him every year since he was 12. It was our tradition. When I arrived at the party with it, Jessica took the plate from my hands with a tight smile. "Ethan is on a low-carb diet now, Helen, but thanks for the effort." The cake sat untouched in the kitchen, while Ethan, unaware, ate the gourmet appetizers she had ordered. I swallowed my hurt pride as I always did. It was just her way, I thought. She comes from a different world, she doesn't understand our simple traditions. And deep down I hoped that over time we would grow closer, that she would see me as family. The engagement came quickly, just a year after they started dating. Ethan was beaming when he told me he had proposed during a fancy dinner at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. I forced a smile and hugged him tight, telling him how happy I was for him, all while fighting a sense of loss I couldn't explain. The wedding planning completely excluded me. I wasn't called for menu tastings, cake selections, florist visits, or any other decisions. When I subtly asked if I could help, Jessica replied, "Don't you worry about a thing, Helen. We've already hired the best professionals. You just need to show up in a nice dress on the day." And so it was, until the eve of the wedding, when I decided to make one last effort to build a bridge. I prepared an album full of photos and memories of Ethan's life, from his first steps to his law school graduation. Each page told a story of love and overcoming adversity. each photo carefully chosen to show the wonderful man my son had become. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner with the album wrapped in silver gift paper. Jessica intercepted me at the entrance, her white rehearsal dress shimmering under the soft lights. "Helen," she said with a shallow smile, "you came?" "Of course I did," I replied, holding out the package. "I made this for you both. I thought maybe you could look through it together tonight before the big day." That's when she leaned in, her expensive perfume invading my space, and whispered those words that would scar me forever. "Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family. You've done your part, you raised Ethan. Now he's my husband, my family. And you're just extra baggage. Don't embarrass us by clinging to him." I stood there paralyzed in disbelief. Before I could answer, she continued, "In fact, maybe it's best if you don't even show up tomorrow. You'll save us the drama, Helen. It's not like anyone really expects you to be there." I don't remember how I got out of there. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the teal-blue dress I had bought especially for the wedding, as silent tears streamed down my face. That night, I made a decision I never thought I would make. For the first time in Ethan's life, I wouldn't be there for him. I would not show up to the wedding. And that decision, which felt like my final surrender, would end up being the catalyst for a devastating truth that no one was prepared to face. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clear blue sky, the kind of perfect day every bride dreams of for her big moment. I woke up before my alarm, years of early morning routine etched into my body like an internal clock. For a moment, I moved on autopilot. I made coffee, took the dress off its hanger, laid out the shoes I'd bought especially for the occasion, simple but elegant, the kind a proud mother would wear to her son's wedding. Then Jessica's words came back like a punch to the gut. "You're just extra baggage." I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling around my coffee mug, as the morning sun drew patterns on the tile floor I had installed myself years ago when I didn't have the money to hire a professional. My phone started buzzing, incessantly texts from family and friends, all on their way to the church, all asking where I was. I ignored every single one. After an hour, the first call from Ethan came. I let it go to voicemail, unable to hear his voice without breaking down. His message sounded worried, confused. "Mom, where are you? We're all waiting for you. Please call me." It was the first time in 25 years I had deliberately let him down. The pain was almost physical, like I was tearing something vital inside me. But Jessica's words had opened a wound I had been ignoring for a long time. For years, I put Ethan's needs before my own, stifled my feelings, swallowed veiled insults and condescending treatment, all in the name of love for my son. But that morning, something different was stirring inside me, a voice that said, "You deserve respect too. You deserve dignity too." For the first time, I was choosing myself over my son. At 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. It was my sister Sarah, still dressed for the wedding, her face a mixture of concern and irritation. "Helen, what on earth are you doing? Everyone is looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour." I motioned for her to come in, unable to speak without tears escaping. We sat in the living room, the teal dress still hanging on the closet door like a ghost of what should have been. "I'm not going," I finally managed to say. Sarah looked at me as if I had just announced I was moving to Mars. "What do you mean you're not going? It's your only son's wedding." "Jessica told me that after the wedding, I'm no longer part of their family. She told me not to even show up today." My sister turned pale indignation, replacing the confusion on her face. "She said that she looked at you and said that—" I nodded, the tears finally winning the battle against my self-control. "She said I'm extra baggage, that I did my part, and now I should get out of the picture." Sarah sat down heavily beside me, taking my hands in hers. For a long moment, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. "Oh, Helen," she finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew there was something wrong with that girl. She loves him in her own way." I tried to defend, a last flicker of hope for Ethan's future. "No." Sarah shook her head firmly. "Love doesn't treat people like that. Love doesn't exclude. Love doesn't humiliate. As we talked, my phone kept vibrating with messages and calls, Ethan growing more desperate, confused friends. Jessica's family curiously in complete silence. At 11 o'clock, the church bells began to ring in the distance. I imagined the guests taking their seats. Ethan nervous at the altar, Jessica getting ready in some side room of the church, probably pleased with my absence. This was supposed to be the beginning of the end of my story as a central part of Ethan's life. A step into the shadows, into the role of a distant figure to be tolerated on holidays and birthdays, always kept at arm's length. But fate had other plans. Shortly after noon, when the bells should have been announcing the union of the new couple, my phone rang again. It was Sarah, who had gone back to the church at my request. Her voice was trembling so much I could barely understand her words. "Helen," she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "The wedding didn't happen." My heart stopped. "What do you mean it didn't happen?" Ethan found out. "God, Helen, it's so awful. He found out everything about Jessica moments before the ceremony." The floor seemed to disappear from under my feet. "He found out she was cheating on him with her boss for months, and there's more, so much more. Her family is bankrupt, Helen. They needed Ethan's money to save themselves. The prenuptial agreement she insisted on so much was a trap to funnel his future earnings into her family's accounts." The world spun around me as the pieces fell into place. The occasional comments about Ethan's future salary, Jessica's insistence on controlling all financial aspects of their relationship, the way her father during the engagement had told me with a cryptic smile, "Your struggle is over, Helen. Now it's our turn to take care of Ethan." It wasn't love. It was never love. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to use my son to exploit everything he had worked so hard to achieve, everything we had achieved together. "How is Ethan?" was all I could ask, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. There was a long pause filled only by Sarah's ragged breathing. "Devastated," she finally answered, "but also determined. You should have seen him, Helen. When he confronted Jessica in front of everyone, he was different. Like he finally woke up from a long dream." When I hung up the phone, I sat motionless for several minutes trying to process it all. The wedding that didn't happen, the betrayal, the financial scheme, and in the midst of it all, the one absence that should have shattered me, my own ended up being the only thing that saved me from witnessing my son's public humiliation. Maybe I thought with bitter irony, I should thank Jessica for pushing me away on this very day. The next few hours passed in a feverish blur. My phone didn't stop ringing, each new tone bringing more details about the disaster that had unfolded at the church. Guests leaving in shock. Jessica's family trying to do damage control, making up stories, blaming Ethan for leaving her at the altar. And at the center of the storm, my son, whom I still hadn't managed to speak to directly. Around 3 p.m, a loud knock on the door made me jump. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, still in his wedding suit, his tie undone, and his eyes red. Without a word, he walked in and hugged me so tightly, he almost knocked the wind out of me. "Mom," he whispered into my hair, "did you know?" I felt my heart clench. "Know what, honey?" "About Jessica, about who she really is." I gently pulled away, looking into his eyes. I knew she didn't want me around. I knew she didn't respect me. But no, Ethan, I didn't know about the betrayal or her family's financial plans. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "She told you not to come to the wedding, didn't she? That's why you weren't there." I couldn't lie to him. I never could. "The night before, she told me that after the wedding, I would no longer be part of your family. She said it was better if I didn't even show up." His face darkened, a fresh wave of pain and anger passing over his features. "And you believed her? You believed I would let that happen?" That question hit me like a lightning bolt. Had I, after all these years of raising him, after knowing his heart better than anyone, really believed he would let me be pushed out of his life? The truth hurt. Yes, I had believed it. Not because I didn't trust Ethan, but because I had seen the power Jessica held over him, the way he seemed blind when it came to her. "Ethan, she turned you into someone else when she was around. Someone I barely recognized sometimes." He slumped onto the sofa, covering his face with his hands. "I know," he mumbled through his fingers. "I know." I sat beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. "What happened at the church? I want to hear it from you." Ethan took a deep breath as if gathering his strength. "Robert, my best man, he received photos of Jessica with her boss Charles, recent photos from 2 weeks ago. They were, well, it was clear what was happening." He swallowed hard. "Robert showed them to me minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some misunderstanding or old photos from before we met. But they weren't," I finished softly. "No, the date was right there in the corner of the photos. And she was wearing the bracelet I gave her for our last anniversary." His voice broke. I confronted her in the prep room. First she denied everything, then she said it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But then her cousin Mary, who was drunk on champagne and nerves, let something slip about the prenup. About how Jessica's father had been celebrating the night before, that their financial problems would be solved after tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the betrayal my son had endured. It wasn't just infidelity. It was an elaborate trap, a web of lies woven by people who were supposed to love him. That's when I realized, Ethan continued, his voice gaining firmness, that it was never about me. It was about what I could provide, my future salary, my career, my contacts, all part of a plan. "And what did you do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. A sad smile crossed his lips. "I walked to the altar not to get married, but to announce to all the guests that the wedding was canceled, that Jessica had betrayed my trust, and that our relationship was over." I imagined the scene. My son, always so reserved and private, standing in front of 200 guests, laying bare his pain and disappointment. The courage that must have taken left me speechless. "Her family went crazy," he continued. "Jessica's father threatened me right there in front of everyone, said I didn't know who I was messing with. Her mother started screaming that I was humiliating her daughter. And Jessica," he stopped, the pain clear in his voice, "Jessica completely transformed. All that charm, all that sweetness just disappeared. She called me a coward, said I was overreacting, that everyone cheats, that I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me." I took his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, honey." He squeezed my hand back, his eyes finding mine. "You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't even finding out about the financial scheme. It was realizing that she wanted to push you away from me, that she treated you like something disposable." His voice cracked. "You who gave everything for me, who never not once abandoned me." The tears I had been holding back since he arrived finally spilled over. "Oh, Ethan. And today when you weren't there. At first I was furious. I thought you had abandoned me right when I needed you most. But now I understand. She forced you into it. She made you believe it was what I wanted. I never should have believed her. I admitted guilt consuming me. I should have been there for you no matter what she said." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, Mom. Maybe it was for the best. You didn't have to witness that circus, and in a weird way, your absence made me see more clearly. When I realized that you, the most reliable, most constant person in my life, weren't there, it was like something clicked inside me. I started to question everything." A long silence settled between us, filled only by the distant sound of birds in the garden and the occasional chime from my phone, which we now completely ignored. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was thinking deeply. "I'm not sure. I have to deal with the practical stuff, cancel the honeymoon return gifts, and I imagine her family won't give up easily. Jessica's father has connections, and from the looks of it, he's desperate for money. We'll face it together," I stated, feeling a new resolve growing inside me. "Whatever it is." Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen on his face in months. "Together." He nodded, squeezing my hand. That night, while Ethan slept in the room I had kept untouched for him all these years, I sat on the back porch looking at the stars. The pain for what my son was going through was real and deep, but there was also secretly a small feeling of relief, as if we had narrowly escaped something much worse than a canceled wedding. Years of manipulation, isolation, financial and emotional abuse. What I didn't know then was that the story was far from over. In fact, the events of that day would be just the prelude to an even greater battle. A battle that would test not only our resilience, but our dignity, our truth, and even our financial future. The week after the non-wedding, as I started calling it in my head, the storm I feared finally hit. It began as whispers, small shockwaves spreading through our relatively small community. Then, almost overnight, it turned into a tsunami. Jessica's version of events began circulating on social media. A jilted bride, devastated by an insecure groom who gave in to the manipulations of a possessive mother. She posted a picture of herself in her wedding dress makeup, artfully smeared with the caption, "Some people don't know when to step back. Some mothers can't cut the cord." The comments flooded her page. Strangers offering support, friends demanding to know what kind of man leaves a woman at the altar, and what kind of mother interferes in her adult son's relationship. Her narrative was compelling, emotional, and completely fabricated. "Ignore it," I advised Ethan when he showed me the posts, his face pale with rage. "The people who matter know the truth." But we soon discovered it wasn't that simple. Lies travel fast, as my grandmother used to say, and Jessica's were running a marathon. I started noticing strange looks at the supermarket conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached at the pharmacy. An old high school friend sent me a message asking if I had really ruined Ethan's wedding out of jealousy. Even the priest at our parish, who had known me since Ethan was a boy, called me in for a private talk about letting children follow their own path. The outrage I felt was quickly replaced by something more painful: shame. Not because I believed the lies, but because after all those years of silent sacrifice of dignity, maintained even in the most difficult circumstances, I was being painted as the villain in someone else's story. Ethan, meanwhile, was facing his own battles. A partner at the law firm where he worked, who happened to be a friend of Jessica's father, began to question his judgment and emotional stability. Clients he had worked hard to secure were suddenly hesitant to work with him. Then, on a cloudy Thursday morning, about 10 days after the canceled wedding, the final bomb dropped. An official letter delivered by a serious-faced courier addressed to me. I opened the envelope with trembling hands to find a legal notice. Jessica's family was suing me for defamation, emotional damages, and most absurdly, interference with contractual relations. I immediately called my friend Claire, who worked as a paralegal at a large law firm downtown. She came straight to my house after her shift, her face grim as she read the document. "This is pure intimidation, Helen," she said, finally placing the papers on the kitchen table. "They're trying to scare you. This interference with contractual relations is just a fancy way of saying you ruined their financial plan." "Financial plan?" Claire looked at me in surprise. "You didn't know Jessica's family is practically bankrupt. Her father lost millions in bad investments over the past few years. They were counting on the wedding to stabilize their finances." That information landed like a stone in my stomach. So it had never been about love, not for a moment. It was about money control, financial security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, a small act of self-preservation, after years of submission, I gave Jessica the perfect opportunity to flip the narrative. She couldn't be seen as the unfaithful, opportunistic bride, so she painted me as the bitter, controlling mother who couldn't let her son go. It was brilliant in a twisted way. The next day, Ethan received a similar letter. He came home pale, throwing the papers on the table. "They're threatening to sue me too. Jessica's father said if I don't clear her name publicly, he'll drag you through the courts. He said he'll ruin you financially." My heart pounded. Ethan was fresh out of law school, still paying off student loans, his career just beginning. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could drain him before he even had a chance to get established. "What are you going to do?" I asked, dreading the answer. Ethan clenched his fists, a fierce determination in his eyes that reminded me of the little boy he once was, the boy who stood up to bullies twice his size to defend a disabled classmate. "I'm going to fight Mom. I'm going to fight for both of us. That night, as I lay awake, I remembered something Jessica had said months before during one of her condescending moments. "You don't understand how the world works, Helen. Perception is everything. People believe what they see, not what's true." She was right about one thing. Perception mattered. People believed her because she played the victim role so well. If perception was her weapon, then we needed to fight back with the truth. Not in whispers, not politely behind the scenes, but openly, publicly. And I had exactly the ammunition we needed. The next day I rummaged through my small home office, finding every piece of evidence I had almost instinctively saved over the years. Emails Ethan had forwarded me where Jessica talked about her financial expectations for their future. Photos of text messages he had shown me where she questioned why he insisted on considering pro bono work when he could be making real money. And most importantly, a copy of the prenuptial agreement Ethan had asked me to look over with clauses so clearly predatory that any judge would see the intent behind them. When Ethan got home from work, I spread everything out on the living room table. "Look," I said, pointing to the papers, "we have our own weapon, the truth." He examined the documents, nodding slowly. "Yes, we have evidence, but how do we use it against them? If we go public, it will just look like retaliation and feed their narrative that we're vengeful and bitter." I considered his words. He was right. We needed to be strategic. "You're right. We can't just dump this on social media. We need professional help." It was Claire who gave us the answer when we consulted her the next day. "I know an investigative journalist," she said, "Paul Miller. He specializes in exposing financial fraud and corporate schemes. If you have concrete evidence, he can turn this into a legitimate news story, not social media gossip." The idea was perfect. An investigative report would have a credibility our individual statements never could. And more importantly, it would shift the focus of the narrative from family drama to financial fraud, where it truly belonged. Paul met us at a discreet coffee shop downtown, a short man with a graying beard and piercing eyes that seemed to scrutinize every word we said. He listened to our story in silence, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "What you have is strong," he said finally, "especially the prenup and the financial records of the Ramirez family. But I need more. I need independent confirmation." Over the next 2 weeks, Paul worked tirelessly digging into Jessica's family's financial history, interviewing former employees of their bankrupt companies, even getting an anonymous statement from a bank employee who dealt with their troubled accounts. Meanwhile, Jessica's campaign against us intensified. She gave a tearful interview to a local magazine detailing how I had poisoned Ethan against her for years, how I couldn't accept another woman in his life. Her family started making calls to Ethan's business contacts, implying he was emotionally unstable and not trustworthy for important legal matters. The pressure was almost unbearable. Ethan came home more exhausted each day, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I could barely leave the house myself without feeling the stares, the whispers, the silent judgment of neighbors I had known for decades. Then exactly 1 month after the canceled wedding, Paul's story was published. "Behind the Canceled Wedding: The Financial Schemes of the Ramirez Family." The report took up 2 full pages in the most respected newspaper in the region, with an even more detailed online version. It was devastating in its clinical precision. It detailed Mr. Ramirez's successive business failures, the unpaid loans, previous fraud allegations that had been quietly settled out of court. It included a legal analysis of the prenuptial agreement with independent lawyers classifying it as predatory and ethically questionable. And yes, it mentioned the extramarital affair that had been the trigger for the wedding's cancellation, complete with blurred but recognizable photos of Jessica with her boss at a fancy restaurant, clearly in a romantic situation. The reaction was immediate. Online comments flooded in, not against me or Ethan, but against Jessica and her family. So she wanted his money, not his heart. "That poor mother, imagine being treated like that after raising your son alone." "The Ramirezes are gold diggers, plain and simple." The tide had turned. The truth exposed to the light of day was doing what our words alone never could. That evening, Ethan and I sat on the back porch drinking tea in silence. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, just a shared exhaustion and maybe a small thread of hope. "Do you think it's over?" I asked finally. Ethan looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. Her family is cornered now, and desperate people do desperate things." He turned to me, his eyes clearer than they had been in months. "But at least now we're fighting with equal weapons, the truth against their lies." I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The battle might not be over, but we now had a real chance to win. And most importantly, we had each other. The bond Jessica had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. What I didn't know then, as we sat peacefully on the porch that night, was that the Ramirezes still had one last move planned. A move so bold, so reckless, that no one could have foreseen it. And it would change our lives forever. The calm that followed the publication of Paul's report was like the eye of a hurricane, a brief moment of peace before the next wave of chaos. For 2 weeks, Ethan and I breathed a little easier. The judgmental stares lessened. Messages of support started to come in. Even a few clients who had pulled away from Ethan's firm came back admitting they had been misinformed about the situation. I should have been suspicious of the silence from the Ramirez family. People like them don't just disappear quietly when they're exposed. They fight back, usually in ways you can never anticipate. The retaliation came on an ordinary Wednesday while Ethan was in court on a case and I was grocery shopping. My phone rang. An unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Helen Oliveira," a formal male voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is Detective Martins from the police department. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible to give a statement." My blood ran cold. A statement about what exactly? There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "We have a formal complaint against you for extortion, blackmail, and making threats against the Ramirez family." The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling down the supermarket aisle. "That's absurd, I never—" "Mrs. Oliveira," the detective interrupted, his voice now softer. "I strongly advise you to come with a lawyer." I left the groceries right there and drove home in a state of shock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. Once inside, I immediately called Ethan, who rushed out of the courthouse as soon as he heard my trembling voice. By the time he got home, I had found the document an officer had left at my door during my absence, an official summons detailing the accusations. According to the complaint, I had threatened the Ramirez family with public exposure of false information unless they paid a significant sum of money to buy my silence. "This is completely fabricated," Ethan said, his face red with rage as he read the document. "They're trying to criminalize the fact that we exposed the truth about them." "But how can they just invent accusations like that? Don't they need proof?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "To start an investigation, not necessarily. And they've probably fabricated some kind of evidence, fake emails, edited recordings, anything to give the accusation initial credibility. And now?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Now," Ethan said with determination, "we fight, and this time it's not just for our reputation, but for your freedom." The next morning, we reported to the police station. Ethan had spent the entire night preparing our initial defense while I sat beside him at the kitchen table, providing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the Ramirez family. The station was an old, imposing building downtown. As we walked up the entrance steps, I noticed a small group of reporters gathering. Someone had leaked information about the accusation to the press. "Don't say anything," Ethan murmured, putting a protective arm around me as we hurried past them. "Not a word." Detective Martins was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an unreadable expression. He led us to a small interrogation room, a surreal experience for me, who had never been on the wrong side of the law in my entire life. "Mrs. Oliveira," he began after turning on a recorder, "are you aware of the allegations made against you?" "Yes," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "And they are completely false." Ethan stepped in professionally. "Detective, I'd like to state for the record that my mother vehemently denies all allegations and that we are prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation, confident that the truth will prevail. The questioning lasted 2 agonizing hours. I was interrogated about every interaction I'd had with Jessica and her family, about my motives for not attending the wedding, about what I really wanted by contributing to the news report that exposed the Ramirezes. I answered every question honestly, but as the interrogation wore on, I noticed something disturbing in the detective's tone. It felt like he had already made up his mind, as if he were just going through the motions, not truly investigating. When we finally left, Ethan was tense. "He's not being impartial," he muttered as we walked to the car. "Someone got to him." My stomach sank. "Do you think Jessica's family has connections in the police department?" "Maybe not directly," Ethan replied, "but her father has enough money and influence to open doors, and desperate people don't care about ethics." In the following days, the situation worsened. The story leaked to all the local papers, but in a distorted form. Mother accused of extorting son's ex-fiancée's family. My name and picture were everywhere. The small salon where I worked part-time politely called to say it might be best if I took a leave of absence until everything was sorted out. Neighbors who had started greeting me again after Paul's report went back to averting their eyes. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. One night, sitting at the kitchen table reviewing documents with Ethan, I broke down in tears. "Maybe we should just give up," I whispered. "Maybe we should just say whatever they want to hear, publicly retract the story." Ethan put down the papers and took my hands. "Mom, look at me." His eyes were firm, resolute. "That's exactly what they want. To break us, to make us doubt the truth, to make you feel so cornered that you'd agree to any deal just to make this end. But what if they succeed? What if I get arrested for something I didn't do?" "That's not going to happen," he stated with a conviction I desperately wanted to share. "We have the truth on our side. And now we have something else." "What?" A small smile appeared on his face. "Help. Paul the journalist is furious about this attempt to criminalize the press. He's investigating Detective Martins looking for connections to the Ramirezes. And Claire managed to get her boss, one of the top criminal defense lawyers in the city, to take our case pro bono." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. We were not alone in this fight. The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. Paul published a new report this time, focusing on the questionable investigative methods of the case against me. He had discovered that Detective Martins had a son who worked for one of the few surviving companies in Mr. Ramirez's crumbling empire, a clear conflict of interest that the detective had failed to mention. Simultaneously, our new lawyer, Dr. Evans, filed a formal petition questioning the validity of the evidence presented against me, demanding it be subjected to forensic analysis to verify its authenticity. The pressure began to build no longer on us, but on the Ramirezes and the system they had tried to manipulate. 3 days after Dr. Evans's petition, we received a call from him, his usually calm voice now charged with emotion. "The district attorney's office is considering dropping the case," he said. "It seems the evidence doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and they don't want the embarrassment of pursuing such an obviously fabricated charge." Ethan and I hugged, crying with relief, but our celebration was cut short by the rest of Dr. Evans's information. "There's a condition, however. The Ramirezes are proposing a deal. They'll drop the criminal charges if you sign a public retraction of Paul's report and agree to a permanent non-disclosure agreement about the entire affair." I looked at Ethan, feeling the rage rise within me. Even now cornered, they were still trying to silence us, to force us to deny the truth. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the force of my conviction. "I will not lie to save their reputation. I will not disown the truth." Ethan nodded, a proud smile lighting up his face. "Dr. Evans, our answer is no. Tell them we are prepared to see this through to the end." It was a risky gamble. We were essentially daring a powerful and desperate family to do their worst. But something had changed inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me days earlier had been replaced by a steely resolve. I had spent my entire life bowing down, adjusting, sacrificing my own dignity for the comfort of others. Not anymore. And then when our defiance was relayed to the Ramirezes, something extraordinary happened. They backed down. 2 weeks later, the case was officially dropped due to insufficient evidence. Detective Martins was taken off the case due to the conflict of interest. And most surprisingly, Jessica and her family left town almost overnight, moving somewhere far away where their names and reputations weren't stained by the exposed truth. The storm had finally passed, but as we would discover in the months that followed, it had left both destruction and growth in its wake. It's strange how life marks you. How certain experiences are imprinted on us, changing not just who we are, but how we see the world around us. In the months that followed the case being dropped, I learned that truth firsthand. The immediate relief gave way to something more complex, a healing process that was both liberating and painful. Perhaps the hardest part was accepting that even with our public vindication, some wounds would never fully heal. Some neighbors remained distant. Certain friendships never fully recovered. Doubt, once planted, is a stubborn seed. Ethan faced his own challenges. Although his career at the law firm was finally moving forward without the shadow of the false accusations, the emotional trauma of Jessica's betrayal left him cautious, reserved. He threw himself into work with an intensity that sometimes worried me, as if he could erase the memories through sheer effort. "You need to give yourself time," I would tell him gently, on nights when I found him still hunched over legal documents at 2 a.m, his eyes red with fatigue. "The pain doesn't go away if you ignore it." "I'm fine, Mom," he would always reply with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a lot of work." But there were also moments of genuine growth between us. One evening, about 6 months after the whole ordeal, we were sitting on the porch watching a summer storm roll in. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and distant lightning occasionally lit up the dark sky. "You know what's strange?" Ethan said suddenly, breaking our comfortable silence. "I look back now and see all the signs I ignored with Jessica. The way she talked about money, how she tried to pull me away from people who actually cared about me, how she reacted when I mentioned pro bono cases." "It's always easier to see the patterns in hindsight," I replied softly. "But it's not just that." He turned to me, his eyes serious in the dim porch light. "I wonder why I ignored those signs. Why did I want to believe in her so much that I was willing to sacrifice the things and people that really mattered?" That was a question I had asked myself countless times, but had never dared to voice. Why had my smart, sensitive son fallen so completely under the spell of someone like Jessica? "I think I was trying to fill something," he continued, the words coming out slowly, as if he were discovering the truth as he spoke. "After Dad left, I always felt like there was something broken in me, something that made me not enough. And Jessica seemed so perfect, so complete. I thought being with her would somehow complete me too." My heart ached. All those years, all those sacrifices to shield him from the pain of abandonment, and still she had found a way in. "Ethan, you were never not enough. Never." "I know that now," he said, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. "Ironically, thanks to Jessica. If she hadn't come in and turned our lives upside down, I might never have confronted that fear. I might never have realized that I am enough exactly as I am." At that moment, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, I felt a kind of peace settle between us. An understanding that sometimes the most violent storms bring the most necessary changes. For me, the change came more gradually, but just as profoundly. After decades of defining my identity almost exclusively through motherhood and sacrifice, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had long been forgotten. I started painting again, a passion I had abandoned when Ethan was a baby due to lack of time and resources. I started with small watercolors. Then I moved on to larger canvases, letting colors and shapes express what words sometimes couldn't. The first time Ethan saw one of my finished paintings, he stood in the doorway of the small space I had converted into a makeshift studio, his eyes wide. "Mom, this is incredible! I had no idea you could paint like this." "There are a lot of things about me you don't know," I replied with a playful smile. It was true. There were parts of Helen the woman, not just Helen the mother, that were re-emerging after a long slumber. With Claire's encouragement, I also started attending a support group for women who had been through trauma or major life transitions. At first I went just to listen, intimidated by the idea of sharing my story with strangers. But over time I found my voice. And more importantly, I found a community of women who understood what it meant to be tested to your limit and still remain standing. It was through that group that I met Teresa, a psychologist who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. After hearing my story, she made a surprising proposal. Helen, have you ever thought about using your experience to help others? We have a mentorship program for women going through similar situations, and I think you would be an extraordinary mentor. The idea that my pain could have a greater purpose, that it could be used to help others navigate their own storms, ignited something inside me. I began training with Teresa, learning the skills needed to support others without becoming emotionally overwhelmed. 6 months after the case ended, I gave my first formal talk to a small group of women. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my notes, but when I began to speak, the words flowed naturally. My name is Helen, I began, and for most of my life I believed that loving meant erasing yourself, that being strong meant enduring everything in silence. I'm here to tell you I was wrong. The eyes of the women in the room, some with visible marks of their own suffering, others with more hidden wounds, were fixed on me. An instant connection formed through shared understanding. True strength isn't in how much suffering you can silently endure. It's in knowing when to speak up, when to set boundaries, when to say, no, this is not acceptable. And sometimes, true strength is in asking for help when you need it most. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just helping these women. I was solidifying lessons I was still learning myself. That my dignity mattered as much as anyone else's. That true love never demands you make yourself smaller. That even after 50, there was still time to discover new parts of myself. Ethan came to pick me up after the talk, waiting outside the room with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. When I came out surrounded by women who wanted to talk more, to share their own stories, I saw the pride in his eyes. How did it go? He asked when I finally managed to say my goodbyes. Transformative, I answered honestly, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. For them and for me. On the way home, we talked about the future, something that at the height of the crisis with the Ramirezes had seemed like a luxury we might never have again. Ethan was considering starting his own law firm focused on helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. I was thinking about going back to school, maybe taking a counseling course to complement my mentorship work. You know what's incredible, Mom, Ethan said as we stopped at a red light. A year ago, we were both just surviving. Now, we're actually living. His words perfectly captured the transformation we had undergone. The crisis that was supposed to destroy us had instead forced us to grow in ways we never would have imagined. That night, sitting alone in my little makeshift studio, I started a new painting. It wasn't of the storm we had faced, but of the dawn that came after. Warm colors of hope and renewal spreading across the horizon. As the brush moved across the canvas, I reflected on the journey that brought us here, on the cruel words whispered by Jessica on the eve of the wedding that never was. Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family. She was right, but not in the way she intended. The tomorrow she predicted never came. Instead, a different future unfolded, one she could never have anticipated, and one I had barely dared to dream of. A future where I wasn't just extra baggage in my son's life, but a woman rediscovering her own strength. Where the bond between Ethan and me, tested to its limit, emerged not just intact, but stronger and healthier than ever. A future where the scars we carried weren't marks of shame, but medals of survival. And as the colors blended on the canvas before me, I felt a deep gratitude for this new dawn. Not just for what it was, but for the price we paid to reach it. A price that, however painful, was worth every penny. A year has passed since I painted that first sunrise. The canvas now holds a place of honor on my living room wall. a daily reminder of how darkness always eventually gives way to light. Time, that master of subtle transformations, has done its healing work. Not by erasing the scars, but by weaving them into the broader tapestry of our lives. Ethan has thrived in ways that fill my heart with a pride so deep I can sometimes barely voice it. He did open his own law firm. It's small but growing fast, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud and legal manipulation. The work fulfills him in a way his previous job never could. Seeing him use his own pain as fuel to help others reminds me daily of the extraordinary man he has become. Every case is different, he told me recently during one of our Sunday dinners, now a sacred tradition for us. But the pattern is always the same: vulnerable people being exploited by those who should protect them. I see you in every client, Mom, and I remember why I chose this path. As for me, my own journey has continued to unfold in surprising directions. The mentorship work expanded. I started giving regular talks at community centers, women's shelters, even a few local colleges. My message evolved beyond my own story to address broader issues. Power dynamics in relationships, the signs of emotional manipulation, the importance of preserving your identity, even in the closest partnerships. And yes, I completed that counseling course. At 53, I became a student again, sitting among 20-somethings, soaking up knowledge with a thirst that only life experience can truly awaken. At first, I felt out of place, almost embarrassed to be starting over so late. But I soon discovered that my unique perspective was valued by professors and younger colleagues alike. "You've lived what we're just studying," a 22-year-old classmate told me after I shared a bit of my experience during a class discussion. That gives it a whole different dimension of learning. Painting has also remained in my life a private sanctuary for the days when words aren't enough. My small makeshift studio expanded to take over the spare room that used to hold mostly memories and dusty boxes. The walls are now a kaleidoscope of colors and emotions captured on canvas. Some works are somber, exploring the darker corners of my journey. Others explode with light and possibility. 6 months ago, to my complete shock, a small local gallery offered to display a few of my pieces in a group show about art and healing. Opening night was surreal. Watching strangers stand in front of my paintings, finding their own meanings in the colors and shapes I poured from my soul. Ethan was by my side the whole night, a constant supportive presence. At one point, I noticed he'd been quiet for several minutes, looking at one specific painting, one I had created during the darkest days of our legal case. Deep shades of blue and violet with just a tiny pinprick of golden light on the distant horizon. "This is what it felt like, wasn't it?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off the canvas, like we were drowning with just one sliver of hope to hold on to. I nodded, amazed by his accurate perception. Yes, that's exactly what it was like. He turned to me, then his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like admiration. "You were always stronger than I thought, Mom. Stronger than you knew yourself." Those words have stayed with me, a balm for the moments when the old insecurities still try to creep back in. As for the Ramirezes and Jessica, they've all but vanished from our lives. We eventually heard through mutual acquaintances that they moved to another state. Occasionally, a mention of them will surface. Someone who ran into them on a business trip, or an old college friend who stayed in touch with Jessica. Every time it happens, I feel a strange mix of emotions. A distant echo of past pain, but also a sort of reluctant gratitude. It seems contradictory to feel anything but bitterness for people who tried so methodically to destroy us. But the truth is, without that devastating storm, we might never have discovered the depth of our own resilience. Maybe I would still be living on the sidelines of my own life, defining my worth solely through the role of mother. Maybe Ethan would still be chasing a version of success that wouldn't truly fulfill him. No, I'm not grateful to them. I could never be. But I am grateful for the woman I became by surviving them. About 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. Ethan showed up for our Sunday dinner with a guest, Chloe, an environmental lawyer he met during a collaborative case. At first, I felt that old, familiar anxiety stir in my chest. The ghosts of Jessica loomed in the shadows of my mind, ready to remind me how easily I was cast aside before. But Chloe was not Jessica. That was clear within the first 5 minutes of conversation. Where Jessica talked about herself incessantly, Chloe asked questions genuinely interested in the answers. Where Jessica treated me with condescension, Chloe treated me with a warm respect that didn't feel forced or calculated. At one point, as I was serving dessert, she noticed one of my smaller paintings hanging in the hallway. "This is just extraordinary," she said, moving closer to examine it. "The way you captured that specific light. Did you study formally?" "Not really," I replied, a little flustered by the attention. "It's more of a hobby I picked up again recently." "Well, you have a genuine gift," she said, and something in the unpretentious sincerity of her tone moved me deeply. "My mother is a curator at a gallery in Chicago. She would love to see your work." After Chloe left, Ethan and I washed dishes side by side, a comfortable silence between us, until he finally spoke. "So, what did you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual but unable to completely hide the importance of my answer. I considered carefully before replying. "She seems real, present, the kind of person who really sees other people." Ethan let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. "Yeah, that's exactly how I feel too." "Are you two serious?" I asked, trying not to push too hard. "We're taking it slow," he answered, a small smile playing on his lips. "We both have our own history of complicated relationships, but yes, I think this could be something special." I felt a lump in my throat, a mix of hope and that residual fear that might never completely go away. Ethan must have seen something in my face because he put down the plate he was drying and held my wet hands in his. "Mom, I learned my lesson. The hardest way possible. I learned to see the red flags, to value substance over appearance, to never again let someone separate me from the people who truly love me." His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "And that includes you. It will always include you." That night after Ethan left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea looking at the stars. I thought about the young mother I once was, holding a little boy who asked when his daddy was coming home. I thought about all the sleepless nights worrying if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. If I could go back in time and talk to that younger version of myself, what would I say? Maybe that the sacrifices would be worth it, but that she shouldn't lose herself completely in them. That one day her son would be an extraordinary man, not despite the hardships they faced, but partly because of them. That there would be pain, yes, so much pain, but also moments of joy so pure they would make it all worthwhile. And maybe most importantly, I would tell her that the story doesn't end with, "and they lived happily ever after." It ends with, "and they kept on living, growing, learning, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward stronger together than they could ever be apart." Last week, I received an unexpected invitation. A nonprofit organization that works with women transitioning out of abusive relationships asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual fundraising event. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who once felt so small, so easily disposable, now invited to share my wisdom with hundreds. I accepted, of course. And as I was working on my speech last night, I found myself coming back to those words whispered so cruelly on the eve of the wedding that never was. "Starting tomorrow, you're just ancient history to this family." Jessica was wrong, but not in the way I initially thought. I'm not ancient history. I'm a story in progress, still unfolding in chapters that no one, not even me, could have predicted. Looking at the future now at 54, I see possibilities where I once saw only limitations. I see a son flourishing on his chosen path, perhaps building a new love based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I see my own work touching lives in ways I never imagined I was capable of. I see new sunrises, waiting to be painted, stories waiting to be told, wounds waiting to be transformed into wisdom. And if anyone asks me how I survived the storm that nearly destroyed us, I will say this: When cruel words try to define you, when malicious hands try to shape you into something small and disposable, remember who you really are. Not just a mother or a son or any other singular role the world tries to shrink you into. You are a universe of possibilities. You are a story yet to be written. You are bigger than any definition others try to impose on you. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, when they whisper to you that starting tomorrow you are no longer part of the family, that your value has been used up, that your place at the table no longer exists, remember this. True belonging never depends on someone else's permission. True family isn't defined by prenuptial agreements or financial interests. And your story? Well, your story belongs to you alone. It was that truth that saved Ethan and me in our darkest hour. It was that truth that allowed us to emerge not just as survivors, but as transformed. And it is that truth that I carry with me now, a beacon to light not only my own path, but maybe the path of others who are still struggling to find their light. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see just the exhausted single mother who sacrificed everything, nor the woman dismissed with cruel words whispered on a summer night. I see Helen, whole complex still evolving, a woman who, after spending most of her life taking care of others, finally learned to take care of herself too. And that perhaps is the sweetest victory of all. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and upheaval like you've never seen before.